Chapter 6 of Ox Team Days on the Oregon Trail. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Barry Eads. Ox Team Days on the Oregon Trail by Ezra Meeker and Howard Driggs. Chapter 6 The Pioneer Army of the Plains. During the Ox Team days, a mighty army of pioneers went west. In the year that we crossed, 1852, when the migration was at its height, this army made an unbroken column fully 500 miles long. We knew by the inscribed dates found on Independence Rock and elsewhere that there were wagons 300 miles ahead of us, and the throng continued crossing the river for more than a month after we had crossed it. How many people this army comprised cannot be known. The roll was never called. History has no record of a greater number of emigrants ever making so long a journey as did these pioneers. There must have been 350,000 in the years of their great rush overland, from 1843 to 1857. Careful estimates of the total migration westward from 1843 to 1869, when the first railroad across the continent was completed, make the number nearly 500,000. The animals driven over the plains during these years were legion. Besides those that labored under the yoke, in harness, and under saddle, there was a vast herd of loose stock. A conservative estimate would be not less than 6 animals to the wagon, and surely there were 3 loose animals to each one in the teams. 1,600 wagons passed us while we waited for Oliver to recover. With these teams must have been nearly 10,000 beasts of burden and 30,000 head of loose stock. Is it any wonder that the old trail was worn so deep that even now in places it looks like a great canal? At one point near Split Rock, Wyoming, I found the road cut so deep in the solid sandstone that the king bolt of my wagon dragged on the high center. The pioneer army was a moving mass of human beings and dumb brutes, at times mixed in inextricable confusion, 100 feet wide or more. Sometimes 2 columns of wagons, traveling on parallel lines and near each other, would serve as a barrier to prevent loose stock from crossing, but usually there would be a confused mass of cows, young cattle, horses, and men afoot moving along the outskirts. Here and there would be the drivers of loose stock, some on foot and some on horseback. A young girl, maybe, riding astride with a younger child behind her, going here and there after an intractable cow, while the mother could be seen in the confusion lending a helping hand. As in a thronged city street, no one seemed to look to the right or to the left, or to pay much attention, if any, to others, all being bent only on accomplishing the task in hand. The dust was intolerable. In calm weather it would rise so thick at times that the lead team of oxen could not be seen from the wagon. Like a London fog, it seemed thick enough to cut. Then again the steady flow of wind through the South Pass would hurl the dust and sand like fine hail, sometimes with force enough to sting the face and hands. Sometimes we had trying storms that would wet us to the skin in no time. One such I remember well, being caught in it while out on watch. The cattle traveled so fast that it was difficult to keep up with them. I could do nothing but follow, as it would have been impossible to turn them. I have always thought of this storm as a cloudburst. Anyhow, in an incredibly short time there was not a dry thread left on me. My boots were as full of water as if I had been wading over boot-top depth, and the water ran through my hat as though it were a sieve. I was almost blinded in the fury of the wind and water. Many tents were leveled by this storm. One of our neighboring trains suffered great loss by the sheets of water on the ground floating away camp equipage, ox yokes, and all loose articles, and they narrowly escaped having a wagon engulfed in the raging torrent that came so unexpectedly upon them. Fording a river was usually tiresome and sometimes dangerous. I remember fording the Lope Fork of the Platte with a large number of wagons fastened together with ropes or chains, so that if a wagon got into trouble the teams in front would help to pull it out. The quicksand would cease to sustain the wagon so suddenly that the wagon would drop a few inches with a jolt, and up again the wheel would come as new sand was struck, and then down again it would go, up and down, precisely as if the wagons were passing over a rough corduroy road that nearly jolted the life out of us, as the women folks said after it was over, and no wonder, for the river at this point was half a mile wide. Many of the pioneers crossed rivers in their wagon boxes, and very few lost their lives in doing so. The difference between one of these prairie schooner wagon boxes and that of a scow-shaped, flat-bottomed boat is that the wagon box has the ribs on the outside, while in a boat they are on the inside. The number of casualties in that army of emigrants I hesitate to guess at. Shall we say that 10% fell on the way? Many old plainsmen would think that estimate too low, yet 10% would give us 5,000 lives as 1 year's toll paid for the peopling of the Oregon country. Mrs. Cecilia McMillan Adams, late of Hillsboro, Oregon, kept a painstaking diary when she crossed the plains in 1852. She counted the graves passed, and noted down the number. In this diary, published in full by the Oregon Pioneer Association, I find the following entries. June 14. Passed 7 new-made graves. June 16. Passed 11 new graves. June 17. Passed 6 new graves. June 18. We have passed 21 new graves today. June 19. Passed 13 graves today. June 20. Passed 10 graves. June 21. No report. June 22. Passed 7 graves. If we should go by the camping grounds, we should see 5 times as many graves as we do. This report of Mrs. Adams's, coupled with the facts that a parallel column from which we have no report was traveling up the south side of the river, and that the outbreak of cholera had taken place originally in this column coming from the southeast, fully confirms the estimate of 5,000 deaths on the plains in 1852. It is probably under rather than over the actual number. To the emigrants, the fact that all the graves were new made brought an added touch of sadness. The graves of previous years had disappeared, leveled by the storms of wind or rain, by the hoofs of the stock, or possibly by ravages of the hungry wolf. Many believed that the Indians had robbed the graves for the clothing on the bodies. Whatever the cause, all, or nearly all, graves of previous years were lost, and we knew that the last resting places of those that we might leave behind would also be lost by the next year. One of the incidents that made a profound impression upon the minds of all was the meeting with 11 wagons returning, and not a man left in the entire train. All the men had died and had been buried on the way, and the women and children were returning to their homes alone from a point well up on the Platte, below Fort Laramie. The difficulties of the return trip were multiplied on account of the throng moving westward. How these women succeeded in their attempt, or what became of them, we never knew. End of chapter 6.